The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the penthouse. Alexander Stone stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights twinkle 40 floors below. His guests laughed and chatted around him, their expensive jewelry catching the light like tiny stars. Alexander loved these parties. He loved showing off his success, his wealth, and most of all, his power over people. At 35, he had built a tech empire that made him richer than most small countries. Money had always been his way of controlling situations and people. In the center of his living room sat his prized possession, a black Steinway grand piano worth more than most people's houses. Its polished surface reflected the room like a dark mirror. Alexander had bought it not because he could play, but because it impressed people. He enjoyed watching their faces when they saw it, knowing they could never afford such luxury. "That piano is beautiful," said one of his guests, a well-known actress. "Do you play?" Alexander smiled, his trademark grin, cold and calculating. "I don't need to play it, I own it. That's what matters." The woman laughed nervously, unsure if he was joking. Alexander wasn't joking. He never joked about power. As the night grew later, the party became louder. People drank expensive wine and ate food prepared by celebrity chefs. Alexander moved through the crowd like a king among his subjects, enjoying every moment of attention. Around midnight, he noticed movement near his piano. A young woman in a simple blue uniform was carefully dusting around it. She moved quietly, almost invisibly, trying not to disturb the guests. Her name tag read Isabella. Isabella worked for the building's cleaning company. She came in during late-night parties to clean up messes before the morning. Most rich people treated her like furniture, something necessary but not worth noticing. She preferred it that way. Being invisible meant being safe. She had been cleaning offices and penthouses for 3 years now, ever since she moved to the city. The work was hard, but it paid enough to cover her tiny apartment and basic needs. More importantly, it gave her time to think and dream while she worked. Tonight felt different, though. The piano seemed to call to her. As she dusted its bench, her fingers accidentally touched the keys. A single, pure note rang out across the room. The sound cut through the party chatter like a knife. Conversation stopped, heads turned. Alexander's eyes found Isabella immediately. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the room. Isabella's face flushed red. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just cleaning and I accidentally—" "You touched my piano." Alexander walked toward her slowly, like a predator approaching prey. The guests formed a circle around them, sensing drama. "I didn't mean to, sir. I was only dusting. Do you know how much that piano costs?" Alexander's voice was low and dangerous. Isabella shook her head, clutching her cleaning cloth tightly. Her hands were shaking now. "More than you'll make in 10 lifetimes, Alexander said. The crowd murmured appreciatively at his cruelty. "That piano isn't for people like you to touch." Isabella wanted to disappear. She wanted to grab her cleaning cart and run. But something in Alexander's tone made her angry. She had dealt with rude rich people before, but this felt especially mean. "I said I was sorry," she replied quietly. Alexander's grin grew wider. He loved moments like this, when he could show his power over someone completely helpless. An idea formed in his mind, something that would entertain his guests and put this cleaner in her place. "You want to touch my piano so badly?" he asked loud enough for everyone to hear. "Fine, I'll make you a deal." The room went completely silent. Even the background music seemed to fade away. Alexander pointed at the piano. "Bench. Sit down and play something, anything. If you can actually play, and I mean really play, not just hitting random keys, then you can have anything you want from me." The guests gasped and whispered to each other. Alexander had made this challenge before to people who annoyed him. It always ended the same way, with the person running away in embarrassment. "But if you can't play," Alexander continued, "then you'll never set foot in this building again. You'll lose your job, and I'll make sure no cleaning company in this city will hire you." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. She needed this job desperately, Losing it would mean losing her apartment, maybe even having to leave the city entirely. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Life isn't fair," Alexander replied. "Rich people like me make the rules. Poor people like you follow them. That's how the world works." The cruelty in his voice made several guests uncomfortable, but none of them spoke up. They were too afraid of Alexander's power, too worried about maintaining their own social status. Isabella looked around the room. 50 pairs of eyes stared at her, waiting to see what she would do. Some faces showed pity, others curiosity, and a few seemed excited by the potential humiliation. Her cleaning cart sat nearby, loaded with supplies and the small personal items she carried from job to job. Running away would be the smart thing to do. She could find another job eventually, maybe in a different part of the city where Alexander's influence didn't reach. But as she looked at his smug face, something inside her snapped. She had spent 3 years being invisible, being treated like she didn't matter. 3 years of rich people talking over her, around her, about her, but never to her, like she was human. "Fine," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Alexander's eyebrows shot up. This wasn't the reaction he expected. "What did you say?" "I said, fine, I'll play your piano." The room erupted in excited whispers. Alexander's grin became predatory. This would be even more entertaining than usual. The little cleaner had some fight in her, which would make her inevitable failure more satisfying. "Excellent," Alexander said, gesturing toward the piano like a game show host. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a volunteer for tonight's entertainment." Isabella walked toward the piano on unsteady legs. Each step felt like walking toward her own execution. The Steinway loomed larger as she approached, its black surface reflecting her nervous face. She had never played a piano this expensive, this perfect. The keys looked like they had never been touched by human hands. Everything about it screamed wealth and privilege, things that had never been part of her world. The bench was exactly the right height. The piano was perfectly tuned. In different circumstances, it would have been a dream instrument to play, but right now it felt like a trap. Isabella sat down and placed her hands on the keys. They were cool and smooth under her fingertips. Around her, the crowd pressed closer, phones appearing to record what they expected to be an embarrassing failure. Alexander stood directly in her line of sight, his arms crossed and his grin wider than ever. "Whenever you're ready," he said mockingly. "Take all the time you need to embarrass yourself." Isabella closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Her palms were sweating, making her fingers slip slightly on the keys. For a moment she considered running. She could stand up right now, apologize, and walk away. Maybe Alexander would let her keep her job if she begged. Maybe he would show mercy. But then she remembered all the times people like him had looked right through her. All the times she had been treated as less than human. All the dreams she had given up, all the sacrifices she had made, all the music that lived inside her heart but never got to exist in the world. Her fingers found their positions on the keys. Muscle memory from years of practice guided them to the right places. The room held its breath, waiting for the disaster they all expected. Isabella opened her eyes, looked directly at Alexander's mocking face, and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the room like liquid gold. Each note was perfect, clear, and filled with an emotion that made the expensive chandelier seem dim by comparison. Alexander's grin faltered. His mouth dropped open slightly, as the impossible happened right in front of him. The cleaner could actually play. And she wasn't just playing, she was creating magic. The music that flowed from Isabella's fingers was unlike anything the wealthy guests had ever heard in person. This wasn't the mechanical playing of someone who had learned a few songs from YouTube videos. This was the work of a true artist, someone who understood music in her very soul. Each note seemed to hang in the air before melting into the next one. The difficult passages that would challenge even professional pianists flowed from her hands like water. Her fingers danced across the keys with a grace that made it look effortless, though everyone in the room knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Alexander stood frozen, his confident smirk completely gone. His face had gone pale, and his hands were clenched at his sides. This wasn't supposed to happen. The cleaner was supposed to hit a few random keys, maybe attempt "Mary Had a Little Lamb," and then run away in shame. Instead, she was performing at a level that rivaled concert pianists. The Chopin piece Isabella had chosen was notorious for its difficulty. It required not just technical skill, but deep emotional understanding. As she played, her whole body moved with the music. Her shoulders swayed gently, her head tilted slightly, and her eyes were closed in complete concentration. The guests began to lower their phones. What had started as an opportunity to record someone's humiliation had become something sacred. Several people had tears in their eyes. Others stood with their mouths open, unable to process what they were hearing. Mrs. Richardson, an elderly woman who had attended the Metropolitan Opera for 60 years, whispered to her husband, "Good Lord, Charles, she's extraordinary." The music told a story without words. It spoke of longing, of dreams deferred, of beauty existing in unexpected places. Isabella's playing carried emotions that most of the wealthy guests had forgotten they could feel. In their world of business deals and social climbing, genuine emotion had become rare. As the piece moved into its most challenging section, Isabella's playing became even more intense. Her fingers flew across the keys in passages that required years of training to master. The technical demands would have defeated most amateur players, but she handled them with the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting her craft. Alexander found himself stepping closer despite his shock. He had heard famous pianists play this same piece in concert halls, and none of them had moved him the way this unknown cleaner was moving him now. There was something raw and honest in her playing that professional performers sometimes lost in their pursuit of perfection. The other guests began to crowd around the piano, drawn by the magnetic power of the music. Conversations that had seemed so important minutes ago were completely forgotten. Business deals, social gossip, even their expensive drinks. Nothing mattered except the sounds coming from the Steinway. Isabella was lost in the music now. The hostile crowd, the impossible challenge, even her fear of losing her job had all disappeared. There was only the piano, the music, and the feeling of coming home after a long journey. Her fingers knew exactly where to go, guided by muscle memory and years of practice that her current life had never erased. The piece required not just speed, but incredible control. Soft passages had to be played with the delicacy of a whisper, while dramatic sections demanded power that could fill a concert hall. Isabella moved between these extremes effortlessly, her hands shaping each phrase with the precision of a master sculptor. Dr. Martinez, a music professor from Juilliard who was attending as someone's guest, grabbed his wife's arm. "Maria," he whispered urgently, "do you hear this? This woman isn't just good, she's phenomenal. Where did she train?" But his wife was too captivated to answer. Like everyone else in the room, she was completely absorbed in the performance. The music built toward its climactic section, where technical difficulty and emotional intensity reached their peak. Isabella's whole body was engaged now, her shoulders moving with the rhythm, her feet working the pedals with expert precision. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the air conditioning, but her focus never wavered. Alexander watched her face and saw something he had never expected to see from a cleaning person: complete mastery. This wasn't luck or natural talent stumbling through a piece. This was a trained musician, someone who had spent years studying and practicing, someone who understood music at a level that most people never reach. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, the room seemed to hold its breath. The final passages required both technical brilliance and emotional depth, and Isabella delivered both flawlessly. Her left hand provided a foundation while her right hand sang the melody with a sweetness that made several guests wipe tears from their eyes. The last notes floated through the penthouse like a prayer. Isabella held the final chord just long, enough for its sound to fade naturally into silence. Then she lifted her hands from the keys and opened her eyes. The silence that followed was complete and profound. 50 people stood in absolute stillness, processing what they had just witnessed. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the city sounds from 40 floors below seemed muted. Isabella looked around at the sea of stunned faces. The hostility and amusement that had been there before were gone, replaced by something she had never seen directed at her: respect. These people who had dismissed her as invisible furniture now looked at her like she was made of light. Slowly, tentatively, someone began to clap. Then another person joined in. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in thunderous applause. People weren't just clapping politely. They were giving her a standing ovation, the kind reserved for world-class performers. "Bravo!" shouted someone from the back of the crowd. "Magnificent!" called out another voice. The applause went on, washing over Isabella like a warm wave. She had forgotten what this felt like. The connection between performer and audience. The shared experience of music bringing people together. For years she had only played alone in her tiny apartment, on a keyboard with broken keys and no sound system. But Alexander wasn't clapping. He stood apart from the crowd, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been embarrassment. His cruel game had backfired spectacularly. Instead of humiliating the cleaner, he had revealed her as someone extraordinary, and himself as someone who had completely misjudged another human being. Isabella stood up from the piano bench, smoothing her simple uniform. The applause was still continuing, but she felt suddenly self-conscious again. These weren't her people, and this wasn't her world. She was still just a cleaner who needed to finish her work before her shift ended. Without saying a word, she walked back to her cleaning cart. The crowd parted to let her pass, many people reaching out to touch her arm or shoulder in congratulation. But Isabella kept her eyes down, returning to the familiar role of invisible worker. She picked up her cleaning cloth and moved to the next area that needed attention, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened, as if she hadn't just given a performance that none of these wealthy, cultured people would ever forget. The guests slowly began to return to their conversations, but the energy in the room had completely changed. Everyone was talking about the cleaner, about her incredible talent, about where she could have learned to play like that. But Alexander remained by the piano, staring at the keys that Isabella had just brought to life. For the first time in years, he was completely speechless. 3 days had passed since the party, but Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Isabella. He had replayed that performance in his mind hundreds of times, trying to understand what had happened. How could someone who cleaned offices for a living play piano like that? It didn't make sense, and Alexander hated things that didn't make sense. He had built his fortune by understanding people, knowing their weaknesses, predicting their moves, staying one step ahead of everyone else. But Isabella had completely surprised him, and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Alexander sat in his office on the top floor of his company building, staring out at the city below. He had tried to focus on work, on the dozens of meetings and decisions that needed his attention. But his mind kept drifting back to that moment when the first notes had filled his penthouse. Finally, he made a decision that surprised even him. He picked up his phone and called his head of security. "David, I need you to find out everything you can about someone," he said when the man answered. "Her name is Isabella. She works for Premium Building Services, the company that cleans my penthouse. I want to know everything. Where she came from, where she learned to play piano, what her story is." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, is there a security concern? Did she steal something?" "No," Alexander replied quickly. "Nothing like that. Just find out about her background. Be discreet about it." David had worked for Alexander for 5 years and knew better than to ask too many questions. "I'll have a report for you tomorrow, sir." The next evening, David knocked on Alexander's office door with a thick folder in his hands. "You're going to find this interesting, Mr. Stone," he said, placing the folder on the desk. Alexander opened it eagerly. The first document was a basic employment record showing that Isabella Rodriguez had worked for Premium Building Services for 3 years. Her address was listed as a small apartment in a neighborhood Alexander had never visited. Her emergency contact was her younger brother. But as he dug deeper into the folder, Alexander's eyes grew wider. There were newspaper clippings from 6 years ago, featuring photos of a young woman at various piano competitions. The headlines read, "Local student wins state piano championship," and "Juilliard scholarship winner brings honor to city." The photos showed Isabella, but a different version of her. She was wearing an elegant black dress, sitting at a concert grand piano with perfect posture. Her hair was styled professionally, and her smile radiated confidence and joy. She looked like she belonged in the world of classical music. Alexander found more articles. Rising star accepted to Juilliard School of Music. Young pianist performs with City Symphony Orchestra. The dates showed these were from 5 and 6 years ago, when Isabella would have been in her early 20s. One article included a quote from her piano teacher. "Isabella has the rare combination of technical mastery and emotional depth that marks a true artist. She has the potential to be one of the great pianists of her generation." Alexander sat back in his chair, stunned. Isabella hadn't just learned to play piano as a hobby. She had been a serious musician, someone who had won competitions and earned a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. He flipped through more pages and found academic records. Isabella had indeed attended Juilliard, maintaining excellent grades in all her music theory and performance classes. Her professors' comments were glowing. Exceptional talent. Mature musical understanding beyond her years. A joy to teach. But then abruptly the record stopped. In the middle of her final year, Isabella had withdrawn from school. There was no explanation in her file, just a formal withdrawal letter dated 3 years ago. Alexander frowned and kept reading. David had been thorough in his investigation. The next section contained public records and newspaper articles that painted a different picture entirely. 3.5 years ago, Isabella's father had been diagnosed with advanced cancer. The medical bills had been enormous, even with insurance. Her mother worked 2 jobs but couldn't cover the costs of treatment. Isabella's younger brother was still in high school and couldn't contribute to the family income. Alexander found records showing that Isabella had withdrawn her remaining scholarship money to help pay for her father's treatments. She had left school just 6 months before graduation to move back home and work multiple jobs to support her family. There were employment records showing her working as a waitress, a grocery store clerk, and eventually settling into the cleaning job that brought in steady income. She had been sending most of her paychecks home to help with her father's medical bills and her brother's school expenses. The investigation revealed that her father had passed away 8 months ago, but by then the family's savings were completely gone. Isabella had stayed in the city, working to pay off the remaining medical debt and to support her brother's college education. Alexander found a recent photo of Isabella with her brother at his high school graduation. She looked tired, but proud, standing next to a young man who clearly adored his older sister. The brother had earned a scholarship to study engineering, something the photo caption credited to Isabella's sacrifices and support. David had even managed to find social media posts from Isabella's former classmates at Juilliard. They talked about how talented she had been, how they couldn't understand why she had left so suddenly. Some mentioned trying to contact her over the years, but she had apparently cut off contact with the music world entirely. One post from a former classmate read, "I still think about Isabella sometimes. She was the most gifted pianist in our class, maybe in the whole school. She could have had any career she wanted. I hope she's happy wherever she is now." Alexander closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. The picture was now complete, and it made him feel sick to his stomach. Isabella hadn't been just some cleaner who happened to know how to play piano. She had been a rising star who had given up everything, her dreams, her career, her entire future, to save her family. While he had been building his fortune and enjoying his privileged life, she had been making sacrifices he couldn't even imagine. While he used his money to buy expensive toys like the Steinway piano, she had given up her chance to play professionally so that her father could receive treatment and her brother could go to college. The cruelty of his challenge 3 nights ago hit him like a physical blow. He had mocked her, threatened her job, and treated her like she was worthless. But she was worth more than anyone else in that room, including himself. Alexander thought about the way she had walked back to her, cleaning cart after the performance, returning to invisibility as if nothing had happened. She hadn't tried to tell anyone about her background or defend herself against his cruel words. She had simply endured it all with a dignity he was beginning to realize he had never possessed. He picked up his phone to call David back, then stopped. What was he going to do with this information? He couldn't undo what had happened at the party. He couldn't give Isabella back the career she had sacrificed. He couldn't bring back her father or erase the years of struggle she had endured. But as he sat in his luxurious office, surrounded by symbols of his wealth and success, Alexander realized something had changed inside him. For the first time in his adult life, he felt ashamed of who he had become. And for the first time ever, he wanted to be better than he was. The question was whether it was too late to try. Isabella was wiping down the mirrors in the lobby of Alexander's building when she first noticed him watching her. It was 2 weeks after the party, and she had hoped that the whole embarrassing incident was forgotten. But there he was, standing by the elevator in his expensive suit, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. She kept her head down and continued working, hoping he would just get in the elevator and disappear. But instead, she heard his footsteps approaching. "Isabella," he said softly. She froze, her cleaning cloth still in her hand. In the 3 years she had worked in this building, Alexander had never spoken her name. Most of the time he acted like she didn't exist at all. "Yes, sir," she replied without looking up. "I wanted to apologize for what happened at the party. The way I treated you was unacceptable." This was so unexpected that Isabella finally looked at him. His usual arrogant expression was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like guilt. But she had learned not to trust rich people when they acted nice. There was usually something they wanted. "It's fine, sir," she said carefully. "I should get back to work." "Wait," Alexander said as she started to move away. "I was wondering, where did you learn to play like that?" Isabella's jaw tightened. She had been dreading this question, knowing it would come eventually. "I took some lessons when I was younger," she said, which was technically true. "Some lessons?" Alexander's eyebrows went up. That was far more than some lessons. That was professional-level playing. Isabella didn't respond. She couldn't tell him about Juilliard, about the competitions, about the career she had given up. That part of her life was over, and talking about it only made the loss more painful. "I have to finish my work," she said, moving toward her cleaning cart. But Alexander wasn't giving up easily. Over the next few days, he seemed to appear wherever she was working. If she was cleaning the 20th floor, he would suddenly need to visit that floor for a meeting. If she was working in the parking garage, he would decide to check on his car. At first, Isabella thought he was trying to catch her doing something wrong so he could fire her. But gradually, she realized he actually seemed to want to talk to her. He would ask her questions about music, about her life, about her thoughts on things. It was strange and unsettling. One evening, as Isabella was cleaning the conference room on Alexander's floor, she heard piano music. She followed the sound and discovered that it was coming from the employee break room at the end of the hall. Curious, she walked over and peeked inside. There, in the corner where there had never been anything but a few old chairs, sat a beautiful upright piano. Not as grand as the Steinway in Alexander's penthouse, but a quality instrument that looked freshly tuned and polished. "Do you like it?" Alexander's voice came from behind her. Isabella spun around, startled. "Mr. Stone, I didn't know you were there." "I had it brought in yesterday," he said, walking past her into the break room. "I thought the employees might enjoy having music during their breaks." Isabella stared at the piano suspiciously. "It's very nice, sir. Would you like to try it?" "I should get back to work," Isabella said automatically. "Your shift doesn't end for another hour," Alexander said. "And I'm the one who sets the schedules in this building. Consider this part of your work duties, testing the piano to make sure it's working properly." Isabella wanted to refuse, but something about the piano called to her. It had been weeks since the party, and she hadn't touched a piano since then. Her fingers ached to feel keys again, to create music instead of just remembering it. Slowly, she approached the bench and sat down. The keys felt perfect under her fingers, and when she pressed one, the tone was rich and clear. Almost without thinking, she began to play a simple Bach prelude, something gentle and beautiful. Alexander sat in one of the nearby chairs and listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Why did you stop?" he asked finally. "Stop what?" Isabella replied, though she knew what he meant. "Playing professionally. You could have had any career you wanted in music. Why are you here, cleaning buildings instead of performing in concert halls?" Isabella's hands clenched in her lap. "That's not your business, Mr. Stone. I know about your father," Alexander said quietly. "I know about Juilliard, about the scholarship, about why you left." Isabella felt like she had been punched in the stomach. "You investigated me." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a fury that made Alexander flinch. "I wanted to understand. You had no right." Isabella stood up so quickly that the piano bench scraped across the floor. "How dare you dig into my private life? How dare you?" Her voice broke, and she stopped speaking. Alexander had never seen anyone look at him with such hurt and anger. "Isabella, I'm sorry. I just wanted to help." "Help?" Isabella laughed bitterly. "You think this is helping? You think putting a piano in a break room is going to fix my life? You think knowing my sad story makes you feel better about how you treated me? No, that's not why I— People like you are all the same," Isabella continued, her voice shaking with emotion. "You think money can fix everything. You think you can buy your way out of being a cruel person by doing some grand gesture." Alexander wanted to argue, but he realized she might be right. Maybe his motives weren't as pure as he had told himself. "My father died 8 months ago," Isabella said, tears starting to fall. 8 months. And in all that time, I've been trying to figure out how to live with the choices I made. I gave up everything I loved to be with him in his final years. And I don't regret that. But now I have to live with what's left." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "That piano up in your penthouse? I used to dream about playing instruments like that. I used to think that someday I'd be good enough to deserve something so beautiful. But dreams don't pay medical bills. Dreams don't keep your family fed." Alexander felt sick. Every word she spoke was like a knife cutting through his conscience. "Isabella, I truly am sorry. For investigating you. For the way I treated you at the party, for everything. You're right about me. I am cruel, and I have been trying to buy my way out of guilt." Isabella looked at him with surprise. She had expected him to argue or make excuses, not to admit she was right. "But there's something else you should know," Alexander continued. "That performance you gave at my party, it changed something in me. I can't stop thinking about the music you made, about the beauty you created. It made me realize how empty my life has become." Isabella didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. "I know I can't fix what happened to your father," Alexander said. "I can't give you back the years you lost or the career you sacrificed. But maybe there's still time for music to be part of your life again." "I can't afford lessons," Isabella said quietly. "I can't afford to take time off work to practice. I can't afford the clothes or the shoes or the sheet music or any of the 100 things that professional musicians need." "What if money wasn't an issue?" Alexander asked. "What if you could have all those things without worrying about the cost?" Isabella shook her head. "I told you I don't want your charity." "It wouldn't be charity," Alexander said. "It would be an investment in talent that's too extraordinary to waste." For the first time since he had started these conversations, Isabella actually seemed to consider what he was saying. The silence stretched between them as she wrestled with possibilities she had thought were lost forever. Finally, she spoke. "I need to think about this." Alexander nodded. "Take all the time you need. The piano will be here whenever you want to play it." Isabella walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back. "Mr. Stone?" "Yes?" "Thank you for apologizing. Not many people like you ever admit when they're wrong." After she left, Alexander sat alone in the break room, looking at the piano. For the first time in weeks, he felt like maybe he was doing something right. 3 months had passed since Alexander first put the piano in the break room. Isabella found herself stopping by more and more often, sometimes playing for just a few minutes during her breaks, other times losing herself in music for an hour after her shift ended. Alexander kept his distance at first, but gradually, he started lingering in the hallway during her practice sessions. He never interrupted or tried to force conversations, but Isabella could feel him listening from the next room. Strangely, his presence didn't bother her as much as it used to. One evening, as Isabella was packing up after a particularly long practice session, Alexander appeared in the doorway. "That was Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto," he said. "You were playing it from memory." Isabella looked up, surprised. "You know Rachmaninoff?" Alexander smiled sheepishly. "I've been learning. About music, I mean. I figured if I was going to talk to someone like you, I should educate myself." Despite herself, Isabella felt impressed. That piece isn't easy to recognize, especially just from the piano part. "I've been listening to recordings," Alexander admitted, "but nothing sounds like the way you play it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Over the past few months, their interactions had slowly changed from hostile to cautious, to something that might almost be called friendship. "Isabella," Alexander said carefully, "I have something to tell you. I've arranged an audition." Isabella's blood ran cold. "You've done what?" "The New York Philharmonic is holding auditions for a new pianist position. It's not just any position. It's a chance to perform with one of the best orchestras in the world." "Alexander, no." Isabella shook her head frantically. "I told you I needed time to think. I never said I wanted you to—" "I know," Alexander interrupted. "But this opportunity won't wait. The auditions are next week and they rarely hold them. It could be years before another chance like this comes up." Isabella felt panic rising in her chest. "I can't do this. I'm not ready. I haven't performed professionally in years. I don't have the right clothes or the sheet music or—" "I can help with all of that," Alexander said gently. "But Isabella, you are ready. You're more ready than most of the people who will audition. Your talent hasn't disappeared. It's been waiting." Isabella sat down hard on the piano bench. The room seemed to be spinning around her. "What if I fail? What if I'm not as good as I used to be? What if I've forgotten how to perform for people?" Alexander knelt down beside her, looking directly into her eyes. "What if you succeed? What if this is your chance to get back the life you gave up?" "I gave that life up for good reasons," Isabella whispered. "My brother still needs support for college. I have debt to pay off. I have responsibilities." "And you'll always have responsibilities," Alexander said. "But maybe it's time to have dreams again, too." Isabella looked at her hands, these hands that had once danced across concert stages and now spent their days scrubbing floors and wiping windows. "I don't know if I remember how to be that person anymore." "You are that person," Alexander said firmly. "You never stopped being that person. You just got lost for a while." Over the next week, Isabella barely slept. Alexander had been true to his word, providing everything she might need for the audition. Professional sheet music, appropriate clothing, even a private rehearsal room where she could practice without interruption. But none of that helped with the fear that was eating her alive. The night before the audition, she found herself in the break room with the piano, her hands shaking too much to play properly. Every piece she tried fell apart halfway through. Her timing was off. Her fingers stumbled over passages she had once played perfectly, and her confidence crumbled more with each mistake. "This is hopeless," she said aloud to the empty room. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can." Isabella turned to find Alexander standing in the doorway. For once he wasn't wearing one of his expensive suits. Instead he looked casual, almost nervous. "I heard you practicing," he said. "You sound scared." "Because I am scared," Isabella replied. Terrified, actually. Alexander walked over and sat on one of the nearby chairs. "Do you want to know something? When I started my company, I was convinced I would fail. I was 25 years old. I had no business experience, and I was competing against people who had been in the tech industry for decades." Isabella looked at him with surprise. She had never heard Alexander talk about being afraid of anything. "What changed?" she asked. "I realized that failure was still better than never trying," Alexander said. "If I failed, at least I would know. If I never tried, I would spend the rest of my life wondering, what if?" Isabella considered this. "But you didn't have to give up everything to start your company." "Actually, I did," Alexander said quietly. "I borrowed money from everyone I knew. I sold everything I owned. I slept on my office floor for 6 months because I couldn't afford rent. The difference was I didn't have a family depending on me." Isabella had never thought about Alexander's early struggles. In her mind, he had always been rich and successful. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that what you did for your family was heroic," Alexander replied. "But heroes deserve second chances too." Isabella felt tears starting again. "What if I'm not good enough anymore?" "Then you'll know," Alexander said simply, "and you can decide what to do next." "But Isabella, what if you are good enough? What if you're better than ever because of everything you've been through?" The next morning, Isabella stood outside Lincoln Center, staring up at the building where the New York Philharmonic held their auditions. Her hands were still shaking, and her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Alexander had offered to come with her, but she had declined. This was something she needed to do alone. However, knowing he was thinking about her gave her strength she didn't expect to have. Inside the building, Isabella joined a group of other pianists waiting for their turns. They all looked professional and confident, warming up with complicated pieces that filled the hallway with competing melodies. Isabella felt like an imposter among them. When her name was called, she walked into the audition room on legs that felt like rubber. 3 judges sat behind a long table, their faces neutral and businesslike. The piano in the center of the room was a magnificent grand, similar to the one in Alexander's penthouse but somehow less intimidating. "Ms. Rodriguez," the head judge said, looking at his notes. "We understand you've been away from professional performance for a few years?" "Yes, sir," Isabella replied, her voice barely audible. "Well, let's see what you can do now," he said kindly. "What will you be playing for us today?" Isabella had prepared 3 pieces, but as she sat at the piano, only one felt right. "Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor," she said, the same piece she had played at Alexander's party, the piece that had started this entire journey. As Isabella placed her hands on the keys, she thought about everything that had led to this moment. Her father's illness, leaving school, the years of struggle and sacrifice, Alexander's cruel challenge and unexpected redemption, the dreams she had buried and the ones she was trying to resurrect. Then she began to play, and all the fear melted away. This time the music told a different story. It spoke of loss and pain, but also of resilience and hope. It carried the weight of real experience, of someone who had learned that beautiful things could emerge from the darkest circumstances. When the final notes faded away, the room was silent. Isabella looked up at the judges and saw something she recognized from Alexander's party. People who had been moved by music in a way they hadn't expected. "Ms. Rodriguez," the head judge said finally, "where have you been hiding?" 2 weeks later, Isabella stood on the stage of Lincoln Center, wearing an elegant black dress and looking out at an audience of thousands. In the 3rd row, she could see Alexander watching with an expression of pride and joy that made her heart soar. As the conductor raised his baton, Isabella placed her hands on the keys of the concert grand piano. She was no longer a cleaner pretending to be a musician, or a former student trying to recapture past glory. She was exactly who she was meant to be, and for the first time in years that was enough. The orchestra began to play, and Isabella joined them, her music rising above the crowd and carrying her dreams back to life. In that moment, she knew that sometimes the best stories aren't about choosing between sacrifice and dreams. They're about finding a way to honor both.